Sup, fam? Today, we're kicking it with our new squad straight from the South, Professors Joseph Ewoodzie and Tyler Bunzey. This convo's so full of laughter and wisdom, we had to split it into two parts. In this first half, Samantha's taking us on a ride through the world of modern hip-hop. You'll honestly be surprised where it goes. Next episode, she'll be back with just Joseph and Tyler for a more in-depth discussion on the state of the art form, the industry, and the effects it has on us now. So, kick back and enjoy. This week on Masculinity. It's your boy, Ramoy George Phillip, the first.
And this is Samantha and Zessie.
This is Masculinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today, and you know we spell it with a hard K.
So, Samantha.
Yes, Ramoy.
You love TV, don't you?
I do, very much.
Have you been watching True Detective? Because there's something that's happening in True Detective right now about gender that you would want to talk about.
You know what? I'm ashamed to say that I am not, because I love me some Mahershala Ali, and I believe he's the lead in that, right?
Well, that was season 3. Right now we're talking 2 female leads who are actually, when you like to talk about like this, like participation in like masculine performance, you have 2 female leads that are doing some really interesting things when it comes to performing masculinity. And I'm not saying it's bad or good. It's just really interesting.
Okay. I would love to hear about that. I'm excited to...
Maybe we'll just tease a little bit more of that of these little intros in the next few episodes, because it's a conversation we need to talk about.
I love it. Okay, well, it's interesting, but we're not talking about TV actually today.
Fine, whatever, that's fine. Okay, sure,
And I'm excited to continue our series on musica, music, la musique. It's very exciting.
I know you're excited.
And we've got some very special scholarly guests in the virtual building again this week. So please welcome Joseph Ewoodzie, Dr. Joseph Ewoodzie, Associate Professor of Sociology and Van Professor of Racial Justice at Davidson College, and the one, the only, Tyler Bunzey, Associate Professor of Cultural Studies. Thank you both for being here. Welcome.
Can I get a little poo-poo-poo on my name too?
Yeah.
Love it. We are so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys.
We're happy to have you here, but I'm just going to say, we speak in scholarly. We both got professors in here. Pop quiz time for you two.
Oh, shit.
Yo, come on now. Y'all playing.
What are we talking about today, guys?
A little gender and hip-hop situation, yeah?
And we're going to take it all the way back to the history. You know, it always starts at the beginning to see how this thing came to be.
Well, we'll see if our professors passed or failed. That's coming up after this break.
Curious about next-gen men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
Welcome back. Now, it's Professors Joseph Ewoodzie and Tyler Bunzey. Did I get those pronunciations correct?
Absolutely.
Ooh, all right. I'm not mad at that. Well, we're glad to have you both today. And actually, I'm going to hand the mic to my very excited co-host right now, Samantha. Take it away from here.
Excited may be an understatement. But first off, Ramoy, do you remember that song Overnight Celebrity by Twista?
I have no idea what that is. Can't lie.
Of course not. So it was an early, I'm sure you two know it because Ramoy lives under, he's like,
Come on now.
I know. I was like, Ramoy's like in a cave with like books around him. He doesn't know what's going on. It's fine.
Wow.
It's fine. It's great.
Wow.
So for you and the audience, those of you who may not know, Overnight Celebrity was an early 2000s hip hop hit that featured this really great violin melody in the background.
Sure. Sounds familiar. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
You probably know it. Okay, so this song came out in 2004 and it was all the rage, right? Hearing this like violin arrangement on a hip hop song. But around the same time, another group was starting to put out these beautiful velvety strings on a hip hop beat. And that group was called Black Violin. Now, I actually have a clip that I want to play for you from TikTok. I'm hoping, let me see if I can make that work. Ramoy, can you tell us what you saw?
Just two dudes just going to town on some violins and some dude on the other side of the screen, like giving a little beatbox, and it was just real hard and real tough, at least video wise, but the music is, classical. It's like violin. So it's just a really powerful, cool contrast on screen.
Great. So Tyler, Joseph, is there anything you want to add to what you saw here?
Yeah, and I think, every once in a while you get these kind of like collabos that I'm always wondering, like, what is it that you're trying to get us to get out of this, right? Mm-hmm. Like putting together this really classical medium and hip hop. It's always it's meant to be some crazy contrast, but I'm not always sure what they're trying to get us to get out of it.
So to give you some background, Black Violin is a duo based in Florida. And where there would normally be an MC rhyming over the beat, they have these beautiful string arrangements of violin and viola, I believe, taking over where rhymes would be. So they've got your classic hip hop ad libs, or actually something called the hip hop sublime, which Tyler, I believe this is what you called the. Can you? Yeah, hip hop sublime.
Yeah, enlighten us.
Yes,
enlighten us.
It's a beautiful term.
Damn it, we're going deep into the academic stuff right away. The hip hop sublime is a phrase that I but that I am building off this actual other scholar that I happen to have right next to me, Adam Krim's Rap Music and the Poetics of Identity in 2000. He comes up with this idea of the hip hop sublime to talk about something kind of different. But what I'm trying to talk about, so he's talking about like the hip hop sublime as like the contrast of notation and scale in hip hop. In other words, that like when you're sampling, you're not always matching things up the way that Western music is intended. And so, there are ways in which the kind of for the Western ear, like dissonance and cacophony actually give that feeling of authenticity to hip hop and stuff like that. I'm not really interested necessarily in the notation scales. I'm not a trained musicologist. What I'm interested in with the hip hop sublime is this idea that there are some things in hip hop that like really can't be put in words. Like, for example, when Biggie starts a track, and you hear that at the beginning, that there's meaning and feeling that is communicated between artist and audience in these small moments, right? That there is like ways that hip hop makes meaning beyond words altogether, that you don't have to have the words just to make meaning, which some other scholars have argued, And so, hip hop sublime for me, long and the short of it, is just a way to talk about the longer traditions pulling from the blues and jazz and all of these other forms that hip hop's always pulling from and extending out of to communicate beyond words.
I love that. And I feel like that's really representative of what Black Violin does, right? They're a string duet, essentially, that does work on hip hop beats. But then there are these slight vocalizations that basically speak to exactly what you just said. So just such a great blend of genres at a very high level, right? These are like classically trained musicians. And one of the things that I really like about them, actually, in their story is that they actually got their name from a jazz violinist named Stuff Smith, right? So when Kev Marcus is the violinist of the two, when he heard Stuff Smith play, he said he could tell that it was a Black dude playing, and he had never felt that listening to other violinists.
Wait, did he say how? Like, how did he have? Yeah, is that ESP? Like, I don't get it.
Well, this is actually kind of interesting because it's a little like a bit of a je ne sais quoi, right? He actually says that he didn't know what that even meant, that he knew that this was a Black man doing it. He just knew that from then on, his mind was completely opened as to what, like was possible with the violin. And that's like super powerful.
I mean, I don't want to speak false to a term that I just learned, but there's something to the sublime in that, right? This sublime connection, whether it's hip hop sublime or otherwise, there's something there. I like this. I like where we're going.
Yeah. I mean, these classically trained folks, he said he really couldn't tell the difference between, or he had never felt that before. So yeah, I think it's just amazing. It's that magical, that sublime, as you say. And so for him, it really opened up what the violin could be, right? So they named themselves after Stuff Smith's 1972 album, Black Violin.
Dope.
Ain't mad at that at all.
So Black Violin has been said to challenge stereotypes about what string musicians sound and look like, right? And to me, it really feels like a widening of how we view and understand hip hop culture. And that kind of feels like a nice resistance to that tunnel vision that we actually talked about in our last episode. We had a conversation about this with a masculinity scholar, actually, Nalo Zidane, about kind of like widening what we think of as hip hop culture. So, Joseph, as a scholar who's written about masculinity and performance in terms of hip hop, I'd love to hear how you feel Black violin and kind of that merge, right, of hip hop and the string instruments, how that challenges stereotypical hip hop masculinity.
Yeah. And I'll start by, again, what y'all just heard is class on Thursday, by the way. We're reading the Hip Hop Sublime.
It's truly crazy y'all brought that in. Like, I'm really tripping out of that right now.
So we're auditing the class right now as we speak.
I know.
More or less. Let's
Exactly.
go. Oh, yeah.
In class, one of the things that Tyler is trying to, he was doing the lecture today in class was trying to get the students to say, like, hip hop, one of the defining elements of it is it tries as much as possible to be resistant to rules and to break as many rules as possible. Mm-hmm. And so people that try to make it like hip hop is poetry, they will go and go and go. And at some point, you're going to fail. And when people are trying to transcribe musicality, hip hop, at some point, you're going to fail, even though it sounds like you're onto something, because hip hop is always trying to break out of that. And so I've always thought the beautiful thing about where hip hop is, right? I mean, like for real, if we think about it, you go listen to Blueprint. Jay-Z was saying faggot this, that, like all over the place. And today, it's kind of unheard of to hear somebody like Jay-Z put it. I mean, if you told me in 1997, as homophobic as hip hop was, that today that was going to be dialed really down, not that it's completely disappeared, or that there isn't heteronormativity, or that, but like, but in terms of dealing with homophobia, if you told me when DMX was really hot, if you told me when Eminem first came out, y'all remember that? Like, if you told me that at that point, like, this is going to be dialed down, you would be, I wouldn't believe you at all. And so I think in terms of masculinity, it's really interesting to me how certain elements of masculinity remain crazy strong, but hip hop is also like such a, let me wrestle myself out of a constraining jacket type art form, that it has been able to shed something like homophobia that once was such an important defining element of it. And I think what these brothers are doing, the violinists are doing, is continuing this tradition of trying to wrestle hip hop out of whatever lane, whatever box you want to put it in. Now, let's be clear. There's still certain things that are fundamental, both the good thing and bad things that are fundamentally hip hop, and they're anchored there. But it's impressive as an art form how many times it wrestles itself out of certain things.
Beautiful. So I kind of want to like zoom out with this too, right? Because we have the hip hop piece, but then we also have the classical piece, right? And so it's worth mentioning that despite the fact that women weren't allowed to play string instruments publicly until the late 1800s, and I'm just going to go ahead and say, but I'm just going to go ahead and say white women, since this is the late 1800s, violin is typically viewed as a stereotypically feminine instrument. Right. So
I can go with you on that. I can see that in my head. That sure, that tracks. But like, what do we mean by that? What do you mean by that? Like, factually speaking.
Well, glad you asked. So according to Zippia, which is like this career expert that measures essentially gender, race, according to career, as of 2021, around 36% of violinists are men.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So it's like the assumption is the majority of violinists are women.
Absolutely. And as per the data, it's strictly it's documenting it using a binary framework. Unfortunately, that's kind of how it goes. So also just under 9% of violinists were Black as of 2021, right? So, so we've got the scholar Vicky D. Baker, who is the professor of music and coordinator of music education at Texas Women's University, who wrote actually about this gender association that society makes with string instruments. And in her paper, she quotes this music theorist Lucy Green, who says the following, quote, "For a boy to engage in vocal or orchestral music, slow music, or music that is associated with the classical style in school involves taking a risk with his symbolic masculinity. If these activities provide a suitable mantle for girls, then they are for boys rather like putting on a dress. So just as girls negotiate a feminine gender identity through music, so do boys negotiate a masculine gender identity. They are often under a great deal of pressure to appear macho." End quote. So what do you think about this?
There are a lot of parts about classical music composition and enjoyment, like in consumption, that are very stereotypically feminine, right? When it comes to like even the way that you consume classical music, you're supposed to be sitting and listening, right? When you're playing, you're supposed to be playing in concert with others. You have one part of many, right? And like the way that this engagement kind of has been figured is as primarily feminine. Like this is the way that a very macho kind of perspective would be like, I'm not going to sit here and just let this thing happen. I'm going to go and listen to this kind of music that's much more aggressive and in your face. And like, there's a certain thing about classical music that forces you to be in a passive place, right? And so I think that there is a little bit in terms of the actual format of the music itself that over time, because it has also been intellectualized and intellectual culture is always feminized as well, that, there's that connection as well.
I mean, I think the final thing that I would add to that is like, there are certain feminized sort of roles in society that when men take it up, they get paid for it. So I'm also thinking, I don't laugh. I was at the symphony last weekend, right?
Y'all see his house. He's at the symphony.
It's very highbrow. Very highbrow. Yes, I know.
sorry, Pico. I'm just messing with you.
I know.
Stop it. Part of the reason why I started going to the symphonies is that one of the conductors live in my neighborhood. So he would come and be like, "Yeah, I want tickets," and we're like, I wasn't planning on going, but sure. So we would go, and now we actually kind of like it, right? So I went, and when you mentioned that, I was like, do I remember seeing the string players be all women? So now I just pulled up the photograph of the Charlotte Symphony, and there's more women in there than I think I noticed, but all the people sitting in the first chairs, and those are like the most prestigious like players, they're all men, right? So I think like certain things happen where you see something like cooking, which is very gendered for as a women's work. But when a man starts to do it, that's when they get like cake for it. And so for me, I can really sort of see some of this stuff happening in those ways.
We just talked about capitalism, but I'll spare you guys my gripes, but excellent point. Like literally just such an excellent point. So to get back to Black violin, so Kev Marcus, who's the violinist of the group, he himself said that the number one reason that he plays violin is because he's not supposed to, right? So He said, and I quote, "I know I'm completely crushing people's perceptions of not only what a violin can do and what music can possibly sound like, but also what a Black man is capable of." Right. So, and a side note is actually, and we'll be posting this on the socials, is that they have a song called Stereotypes, right? Where, they're like these amazing two guys, like just dressed very casually, wearing, playing their, string instruments. And they've got like this kind of montage of all these different people that are in professional positions that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be across gender and race. So it's just great.
Yeah. I don't think we should take it for granted, like breaking stereotypes, challenging the status quo, being whether it's early or just whatever, but being a pioneer in any space is like really difficult because you're the first, or you're one of the early to challenge the normative kind of qualities of the culture. And so you two just being like educators, I'm wondering within the classroom or within the culture, you're seeing this type of innovation, but more so within gender and music and like innovation happening in these spaces.
I mean, I think one thing I would say is that, especially with the consumption of music, America is actually kind of a weird place when we think about it. Because unlike, if you say like a place like France where the being highbrow is to consume very particular kinds of music that's very class and associated with class. In the US, we say, richer folks are culturally omnivorous. That is to say, to illustrate your richness is to be like, oh, I eat barbecue and I eat fine dining and I do this and I listen to this and I listen to this and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I think if we sort of think of so in our classrooms, the kids who are taking the hip hop class are the students who are like, oh, hip hop is saying something about a life experience that's familiar to me, and therefore I'm here and I've been listening to it. But the super rich kid whose parents are paying the 60 whatever grand to go to school, all of it at once out of pocket, they also want to consume this because being able to listen to music across genres is part of what it means to do their class. I don't know if that always completely translates to gender performance, but I can imagine some of that sort of spilling over because that's just how things work in this country in terms of how people perform their class.
Yeah, I think to build off of that, and I think it's important also to state, so Dr. and I or Pico or Joseph and I, we teach in very different contexts. We're at different institutions, but we're teaching a class together across institutions. So I'm at Johnson C. Smith, which is a very, very small HBCU. He's at Davidson College, which is a very, very small PWI, right? 30 minutes away from each other.
It's like the black dude that teaches the white school and the white dude.
Yeah, I was about to say.
I know you was thinking it. I know y'all was thinking it. I was thinking it.
I did my research and I was like, they're breaking all the boundaries, okay? Yes. Yes.
But, so when we're talking, we'll probably try to speak to those contexts. So I just want to make that clear. But also, I think that what I see and what pedagogy, teachers see everywhere is that curiosity with men. It tends to be something that needs to be masked, rerouted. So it's like masculine interest is kind of this thing that's like, if you're too into something, that is a violation of your masculinity. If you're too eager, that's a violation of your masculinity, right? Whereas women tend to be rewarded for that kind of a work. I see this at Smith, JC Smith, where I teach all the time, right? That I see men who are paying attention, but they're masking, in theme of the podcast, like all of the time to seem like they're not, right? Whereas the women are, hey, I want to answer the question and so on. And so I think my point of saying this is that when we're looking at engagement with music and with ideas and with art forms, right, that there's actually a gendered notion of consumption as well, right? Daphne Brooks just wrote an incredible book called Liner Notes for the Revolution, thinking about Black women as listeners, right, and how significant that focus is, and it's because often Black women and women in general are seen as kind of like consumers in a very certain space, but not as thinkers, right? And so we see the ways in which consumption and thought about art are also gendered in and of themselves.
Oh my God.
And I think if we layer on top of it, the difference in the space of doing your masculinity across racial groups, you will also see that the white man potentially has a space to do a wider range of masculinity than the black man has to have the range of masculinity, right? So that becomes really interesting to observe in our platform.
Yeah, so speaking of white people, so Ramoy, you like country, right?
Hey, man, you can't take the Texas out of the Texas boy? I don't know. Texas forever?
I love it.
All right, so were you mad when Old Town Road was removed from the country Billboard charts? Like, was your Texan heart just like shattered, or were you like, finally, take it off?
I mean, like, I'm not surprised at all. Like, the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, like, screw them all, screw it all. I love country music, but it's a love-hate relationship, and shout out to Lil Nas X, that's all I gotta say. And Billy Ray Cyrus, too, but, like, yeah, Lil Nas.
Interesting. Okay, well, I don't like country and I don't really know it that well, so I'm not going to comment on it. And luckily, that's not actually why I'm bringing this up. So
Okay, let's thank God.
Lil Nas X might have made the Billboard charts in country, but he's another artist that widens the lens of what hip hop can be, right? And so I want to follow that up actually with a couple of quotes that I think that at least two of you might recognize. So, quote. All right. Gay, lesbian, and bisexual dancers were welcome on the dance floor. They were not relegated to the peripheries or the back rooms. After their stand against the police in 1969 at the Stonewall Inn, sexuality became more central to the social identities of these clubgoers. End quote. Quote number 2, the formation of hip hop was only a few years removed from these developments and a few train stops away. So one might reasonably assume that hip hop participants were, in some ways, exposed to these alternatives, constructions of gender and sexuality in Manhattan, especially since they were participants in an activity shared by both scenes, which was DJing. End quote. So does anyone recognize these quotes?
Man, I was just making sure there wasn't any like weird words in there. But I'm like, that kind of go hard.
Yeah, you do. So audience, so this quote is from your amazing book, Breakbeats in the Bronx, Rediscovering Hip Hop's Early Years. And, I feel like in some ways, I want to bring this up because in some ways it feels like Lil Nas X is kind of like the fulfillment of this wild dream, this like wild inclusive vision, right? That LGBTQIA hip hop performers just really couldn't have in the 80s. Like that was not possible. Do you guys agree with that?
So I agree with it, not with him.
Oh.
And I say that only because I am against kind of like, if it kind of generally smacks of hip hop that we can put it in, Lil Nas X is a pop artist. Like he fulfills pop requirements. He comes from a pop tradition. He makes pop references. He's pop, right? And and hip hop artists can be pop artists. No matter what Mos Def says, Drake is both hip hop and pop, right? So we know that we're not talking about excluding him from hip hop. I'm just saying he's not a hip hop artist. To me, someone like Chica, 100%. Somebody like Latifah came out in 2021, right? Someone like Latifah, 100%. Somebody like Young M.A., 100%. These are the people to me that are living out that dream, right? Of like having a queer, inclusive, and I mean, look, all of the rap girlies, like all the great ones, they're all bisexual, right? Like Megan Thee Stallion, we can start to list and go and go and go. Tiana Taylor is hip hop adjacent minimally, right? Victoria Monet, hip hop adjacent minimally. So when we're thinking about these things, right, these are all of our bisexual icons that are leading in the 2020s. And I think that these are the people who are carrying that mantle. Now, we don't have, I think I Love McConan is probably one of the few male gay hip hop artists, but he's also defunct, right? He's been kind of taken out of the culture in many ways. So when we think about this, there is a different level of entry. And I don't think that men have the ability to be out in hip hop now without penalty. I just don't think that's possible.
See, so I think that's the point of like, so if we take what you're like, if we sort of open big tent hip hop, right? Like, and said, as many different people can fit under this tent. And we imagine Lil Nas X as, even if existing on the periphery, exists in the field of hip hop. Then I think the argument that you're making is really interesting of like, Lil Nas X, if we sort of take it back to the moment that I'm writing about in this book, was the person who is going to the gay clubs and then coming back and rapping at the same time, right? Like, and shuffling back and forth between those spaces. And, you know, I don't know if I like his music or if I would play his music. Like, I don't know if aesthetically his music is, you know, my jam. But I think I always appreciated his way of pushing these kinds of boundaries, especially for a Black man. For me, like, anytime any person expands the space of what is possible for me to be, and me and my brother and my cousins to be as a Black man, I say, that's what's up, right? Like, so for me, that's really cool, because it's like, you know, it's a weird thing to be a part of an oppressor group that is still so restraining in your sense of being, right? And I think masculinity is this weird thing where, yes, you're part of a dominant group and you're an oppressor, but it's still so constraining in the way that, I mean, I guess all oppressor groups are constraining to your humanity. But I really think about that specifically with manhood. And I think anytime anybody does that to break it apart, especially for Black men, there's a small part of me that cheers for them.
Yeah, there's so many things that you said in there. And actually, I appreciate all the shout outs that you made, Tyler, because, you know, talking about some of these other artists, right? You know, you've got people like Saucy Santana, you know, who's an openly gay rapper who actually also may be kind of on the pop side, but he's an openly gay rapper who performed actually with Madonna during Pride Month. Freddie Ross, who's a gay man who performs as his alter ego, Big Frida, whose pronouns are she, her. And then we've got Ice Spice, right, who's openly bisexual. Then, of course, all the folks that you know named, the Megan Thee Stallions, the Cardi B's, all those guys. And then, of course, Young M.A, which you also named. So, and that's great. And I kind of want to bring this up with you and see what you guys think. So it sometimes maybe feels like there's only room for LGBTQ rappers to exist like in mainstream spaces when they've disclosed their sexuality, right? Or gender, and are using it in some ways as part of their performance. And I want to say specifically for rappers who are men in some cases, right? And so I love and appreciate this, right? Love the extra, love everything. But is there more room these days for a queer rapper like a Samaj from Brooklyn, for example, who simply calls himself, quote, a thug who happens to be homosexual, end quote. It just feels like in the mainstream, sometimes there could be different representations of LGBTQ rappers, in particular for masculine ones. So I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, well, one thing when you were talking, and thank you also for bringing up Saucy Santana, that was totally slipping my mind, and very important to recognize him and Big Frida. And I forgot the middle one that you said. Can you repeat that name?
I said, Ice Spice. I didn't know Ice Spice was bisexual, actually. But this just came up with, and she's like a big name right now, so.
But with the men here, there's an important thing, and I've been thinking about this recently. These men are in the South, right? And the South engages with hip-hop and gender in a very dragged way. And what I mean by that is that, like, the performance of gender in the South, there is something about the performance traditions of the South. And I always, when we're talking about Southern hip hop, I don't think that we can talk about Southern hip hop, you know, in the spirit of Regina Bradley, Taylor Crumpton, you know, some of my heroes, like, and some of the work that they've done is show this connection between blues women and the South, right? And the blues is a gendered performance that is extreme, right? And it's always this kind of like over the top performance. Everything is a little more, a little extra. The South carries that through in its hip hop. I think that's why it allows for folks like Saucy Santana and Big Frida to have as much space as they want, because they are also performing that version of a dragged, extended, exaggerated gender, right? Whereas when we think about other forms of masculine cool that circulate in the West Coast, East Coast, New York, etc., those kinds of avenues to express gender are not available in the same way. So while DMX might be exaggerating gender, right, he's exaggerating gender within this very narrow lane, right? He's playing with masculinity as a performance of authenticity, not as a performance to show the cracks or the edges or the boundaries of the exaggeration, right? The exaggeration is supposed to reinforce the image, not play with it, and I think that these are things that are available to people in different regions because of the cultures that like circulate in those regions. And I just don't think that's available in spaces outside of the South at this moment in time.
That's right. And I think simply to add to that, I remember the scene from, remember the documentary about hip hop and masculinity.
The Byron Hurt one, yeah.
The Byron Hurt one. Yeah. So remember the scene when he was talking to Busta Rhymes about sexualities and homosexuality, and Busta Rhymes just gets up and he says, "I'm sorry, I can't even talk about that. I can't even be around you having those conversations." Now, again, we're sort of revisiting what I said earlier. I don't think Busta Rhymes walks out of a scene with that conversation today. I don't think he expresses any less homophobia today than he may have. I don't know. Don't know the guy, so I don't know. But I don't know if he walks away today. But I also think that, I think as Tyler mentioned, you're absolutely right that like DMX exaggerate masculinity, but never to challenge it. And today we see the same thing from whoever other rapper, right? So you can even think about, what's his name? Killer Mike, who also is an interesting cat, smart person who exhibits a lot of really interesting ideas. But I think even how he does his masculinity, even in his quote unquote progressiveness, he's just an old. I shouldn't call the man old.
It's a safe space. It's not a podcast.
Let me stop. Exactly, right? Y'all got a wide listenership. I don't know where to go. He's just like a black man, right? Like who's still in this very tight box about how to do the masculinity. So I don't know if there's space for that yet, and I think that is to the detriment of this art form.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, there is still a sense, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, that queerness is also racialized as white, which is deeply, deeply ironic, considering that the entire queer liberation movement starts with a black trans woman picking up a rock and throwing it at a cop, right? That's the reason that we have these cute little Bank of America pride parades, which is what we call our pride parade here in Charlotte. But that there still is this sense, though, that queer stuff is kind of like white for white liberals, and so I think that also impacts some of this conversation, that queerness is seen as something that's external to some people. Like, meaning that's not in my community, that's not coming from here. And so I think that also is impacting how hip hop can engage with this space. Because one thing that I'm always careful with too is that hip hop very rarely has a problem that is not a problem of our broader society, right? Hip hop is a space where we can see it, but it is never rarely is it ever something that's unique to hip hop, And so I think I want to point that out as well.
And for me, let me say this real quick. All this stuff that we're talking about, just go watch the Byron Rustin movie, right? This is a gay black man walking around with Dr. King in them. And they like, we don't know what to do with you. And he's like, are y'all serious? Like, well, fight it. And I think as it relates to you, for me, it just gets to this larger question of like, this country is just structured in a way where a white person's humanity is just much whiter than a black person's humanity, even though it's been black folks that's been fighting for the humanity of Americans for all these years. And so that's what it is. And I again, anytime anybody does something or expresses themselves that widens what it means to be black and human in this country, you just got to applaud them for it.
So I got some music to listen to.
You do. You got
some True Detective to watch.
Apparently I do. I'm like so behind on what's actually happening on True Detective, probably because I need to watch it.
Well, books and TV are my game. But, you know, in the meantime, I think we got a new Beneath the Mask episode on Instagram.
That's facts. So, you know, make sure to tune in. You can follow us there at Masculinity Pod. That's always going to be with a K, of course. We'll be sharing additional information about this episode and additional literature there from all of our scholarly guests. You can also find that on masculinitypod.com. And also, if you enjoy our episodes full of literati puns and pop culture shenanigans, please make sure to review us and drop us a few stars, hopefully 5. It'll go a long way to make sure that folks get to engage in this conversation about masculinity, so we really would appreciate it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, it's your boy, Ramo George Phillip the First.
And I'm Samantha Zessie. Thank you so much for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.